Hello, good day everyone. This is first in a series of presentations on cell and gene therapy, also called advanced therapies. My name is Narayanan. I'm head of the complex biologics group at Mozart Consulting, and welcome to this presentation. I'm going to give a short introduction to advanced therapies, otherwise known as cell and gene therapies, and where we are and where we are going. If you look at the history, the regulations for these products in Europe have been around for a little over 10 years. Disappointingly, not too many products have been approved, a little over a dozen, some of them withdrawn already for various reasons. However, the good news is there are a lot more products in development, most of them in early stages, I suppose, about over 1,000 products and about 10% or so on phase 3, which is still good news. I think it's time to think about what's the best approach to take to ensure that these products actually reach that the patients that do actually need them. And although they are regulated under the umbrella of medicinal products with a specific regulation for cell and gene therapy, the comparison, I suppose, has to stop there to ensure that the science behind the approach is appropriate for these products. As you know, many of them are given just once and expected to work for a lifetime, with the requirement for long-term data and so on. So the conventional approach that is applicable to, say, chemical or small biological may not be appropriate, and that's something important to realize. If you compare them to the conventional products, one way is to look at them as comparing apples and oranges or apples and pears, and one could argue on one hand the fruits, they contain vitamin C, they contain fiber and so on, but you wouldn't necessarily treat them all the same way, and you will agree that that's where the comparison, I suppose, stops. In terms of development, it's a journey, and a journey from A to B, when you go from London to Paris, you can take different routes. You can fly, you can take a train, you can drive, so on, but the expertise required and the experience required are not necessarily the same in whether you're flying a plane or driving a car. They are quite a bit different. So I think you need to appreciate those differences to make sure that the journey actually is successful and also efficient. You reach there on time. You don't want to be delayed too much, because that's one of the problems with these products. They take forever. And we need to make it more affordable and achievable and take less time to reach the patients who are in desperate need of many of these products, as you know, and they are potentially effective for lifetime and are at least expected to be safer with less side effects and so on. As you know, some of them, or at least until recently, many of them have their origins in academic setting, and of course there the concentration is more on science, but as a medicine product you need to take into account the regulatory requirements and also going forward the expectation of the payers. So it's a big challenge to ensure everything is taken care of. To start with, the CMC issues or the manufacturing issues has always been a big challenge. It continues to be a challenge even 10 years later. The CMC is not going to go away anytime soon. If you are looking at, say, whether it is scaling up or scaling out, it introduces comparability issues, which is a big challenge always. Then you have things like potency and purity and so on, which is not always easy for these products. It's also important to know that you need to be able to translate all this to the clinical aspect. I mean, for example, if you know what the potency is and how applicable it is to dose selection and effect on patient is going to be beneficial to you to do that. So I would recommend strongly that you don't separate CMC, non-clinical and clinical. You have a sort of combined approach. And when you go to non-clinical, again, as you know, there is no simple solution to this. You can't follow a formulaic approach of choosing a mice or a rat model and then a large animal, as you usually do with a small molecule. You need to be more targeted and more specific, and it could mean a syngenic model and so on. The interpretation of data is also going to be not that easy, and you need to be aware of that to make it meaningful. And not to forget the 3R approach, the reduction, refinement, replacement, which is particularly important in Europe. There are in silicon and in vitro models to consider to ensure, again, that you make best use of all the evidence that you can generate to make it meaningful to go into clinicals. And when you go into clinical, of course, as you know, doing healthy volunteer study is pretty much non-applicable. So you need to go into patients first, more often than not. What that means is that the patients have disease in the background, which can make interpretation of data, especially for safety, somewhat challenging, and need to be pretty open about it, not take the approach of blaming it on the disease of the patient, because it can come back to bite you if you take that approach. And I would strongly recommend that you take a very systemic and not a simple approach to that. Be honest with it. And when you go into clinical, as you know, you can't do a healthy volunteer study. Unfortunately, that's going to be very difficult. So you go into patient. The development in phase 1 and 2 and 3 may or may not apply to your product, and you can have a approach that is tailored to your product to make it more efficient. It's always a good idea to discuss this with the regulators early on to make sure that you're on the right path and you don't make mistakes and learn from that to try and avoid making mistakes. That'll be the smart thing to do. And once you develop and go through, you want to make sure that it's available to patients. As I said before, you need to consider the marketing and the cost and so on early on to make sure it is efficient. So what we call a combined approach or integrated approach to ensure everything is combined early on. So I hope this introduction has been helpful. I would love to hear your comments on what you think, how helpful it is. But we'll, of course, continue this with a further presentation on CMC, non-clinical, clinical, and reimbursement issues and so on to make sure that all are covered appropriately. But for now, I think thanks for listening, and I hope to hear from you. Thank you.